Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stephen Spatz, Assistant Outreach Librarian, and on behalf of Library Director Joe Lucia and the staff of Falvey Memorial Library, I'd like to welcome you to today's event, Superheroes and Scholars, our second annual graphic novels event, featuring veteran comic book writer John Arcudi. It was last year at this time, flush from the success of our first annual graphic novels event, Comics Go to College, which featured a panel discussion with writers and enthusiasts Mary Beth Simmons, Matt Phelan, Jonathan Mayberry, and Brian Lynch, that planning began for the second annual graphic novels event, and it was decided that this would become an annual series, and today's event is the result of that. Before we go any further, I would just like to mention that this event is co-sponsored by Falvey Memorial Library and the Villanova Writing Center. And although I've been warned that it's often dangerous to thank people by name, we do need to make special mention of two people who were instrumental in having this event happen, and that would be Library Director Joe Lucia and the Director of the Villanova Writing Center, Mary Beth Simmons. Thank you. At this time, I'm going to turn the podium over to Dr. Karen Hollis, professor of the English department here at Villanova University and the director of the concentration in writing and rhetoric, and she will get us started. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Welcome again, and yes, I'm Karen Hollis, director of the concentration in writing and rhetoric. I always have to give a plug for the concentration. There are leaflets all about it over there on the table. And if any of you want to know more, it works with a lot of different majors, helps you become a better writer, helps you showcase your excellent writing, and, again, sort of certifies that you have put in the extra time to develop your writing skills. So if anybody's interested, please get a brochure over there. This event fits in really well with my current class in graphic novels, writing and theory that I'm teaching this semester. And we also have a sample graphic novel that one student in our class has written. And where is Rob? Where is the author? There he is. So it's really one of the best in the class. So again, if you have a chance, go over and have a look at his work too, student work. So as you know, I'm here to introduce John Arcudi, who's a Philadelphia comic book writer, best known for his work on The Mask. Yes, The Mask of the movie with John Kerry, BPRD, and his series Major Bummer. Incidentally, everything that I'm going to be telling you about is in a Wikipedia article, which John says is accurate. So I'm a big Wikipedia fan, so I always go there first, and then I kind of judge. But it does seem like it's got the basics here for you, and it's got a lot of links to his work and other published items and other bits of information about comics and comic writing. So again, John Arcudi on Wikipedia. Let's see. Arcudi began working for Malibu Comics upon its founding in 1986, working on its Eternity line. That same year, he started writing for other comics, making his first sales to Savage Tales and Savage Sword of Conan for Marvel Comics, and becoming a regular contributor to the humor magazine Cracked. And he also worked on a number of graphic novels that had been based on films, including RoboCop, Terminator, Predator, Alien, The Thing. Two of these graphic works were adapted as full-length novels published by Bantam Books, and I thought that was interesting because it seemed like, there's all kinds of textual reworkings and influences and productions and pop culture artifacts going on here, because the graphic novel that you wrote, right, was based on film, and of course, okay, and then after that they became full-length novels again. So we have film, graphic novel to non-imagistic novel, I suppose. So kind of unlike what we typically think is the typical trajectory there, I think. Interesting. Arcudi also scripted several stories for Dark Horse Presents, such as the series The Creep and the police procedural Homicide. Arcudi's comics crime fiction also includes several scripts for Batman: The Dark Knight and Batman: Black and White. For Dark Horse Comics, Arcudi worked on developing the character The Mask, first in Mayhem numbers 1 through 4, then in a series of books illustrated by Doug Mahnke. Arcudi's work formed the basis of the 1994 feature film starring Jim Carrey. Arcudi and later Mahnke teamed up for several projects following The Mask, including the DC Comics series Major Bummer, which focused on a group of ineffectual superheroes. Arcudi also served as writer on the Wildstorm production series Gen 13, illustrated by Gary Frank and Cam Smith, and during a run on DC's Doom Patrol, illustrated by Tang Ang Huat. Arcudi invented the character Captain Daimyo for the series BPRD, which he writes with Mike Mignola. He has contributed a BPRD story to the Hellboy comic issued in conjunction with the film as a premium from Wizard Entertainment, and he later wrote a number of separate BPRD series. So I will welcome John and invite him up to the podium to speak. But again, I don't have time to go through this incredible bibliography, but it's mighty long here. Graphic novel, there must be 60 comics, and then each comic has a series that may be 10 or 20, and then there are probably 20 graphic novels. So he is a very prolific author, and thank you very much for coming to Villanova. Glad to see
you. Before that introduction, I didn't feel too bad. Now I feel incredibly old. Yeah. Can everybody hear me? Do we really need this? Can anybody not hear me? You can't? Oh boy. All right. You feel like a DARE counselor. I got to tell you, I'm really envious of last year's event because I could have been part of a panel. Not a lot of pressure on you to really succeed there. And Karen mentioned a lot of superhero stuff that I did, and most of it was just terrible. So don't go read it. I kept trying to. You didn't see me, but excuse me. I don't usually, by the way, sound this sexy. I have a getting over, I hope, some bronchitis, or I'm dying, one or the other. And so, please excuse any coughing fits or cessation in breathing. And anybody know CPR? I'm serious. Nobody? Okay, good. Thanks everybody for coming. Excuse me. And as I was saying earlier about superheroes being my superhero stories mostly being, except Major Bummer. I mean, if I can make fun of them, I can just go, But superheroes have never really interested me, ever. So boy, right? I'm probably in the wrong place. They're even less interesting to me in terms of fictional characters than heroes, or more precisely, good guys. I've never been good at writing superheroes because of this, which hasn't helped my career any. So this lack of interest, this deficit of talent, is why the main character of A God Somewhere is just human. Sam Nowell is his name. The inspiration for Sam and his relationship with the story is biblical. But that proved to be the smallest part of the architecture of the story. And that's what I wanted to talk about today, how I built this story while at the same time exploring the themes therein, or a few of the themes therein. And along the way, we'll also discover that I am, as probably most of you have figured out, a liar. Years ago, when I started in this industry, a lot of folks, comic scholars, looked at comics, specifically superhero comics, as the equivalent of modern mythology. That went away for a while. But recently I was talking to a comics journalist who raised the specter of that again. And I say specter because I think that misses the point of both comics and mythology. I don't want to get too much into what I think comics should be. But mythology has a wider, or it should have a wider application to people than what comics can provide. Comics have just too narrow an appeal, for one thing, and superhero comics specifically are themselves very, very narrow in content. But we do still have the metaphorical equivalent of mythology in the 21st century and in the 20th century and then probably the 19th century and going back I don't know how long. But what I'm talking about is celebrity gossip and celebrities themselves, their stories. There they are, right? These larger-than-life characters who who succeed and fail in bigger ways than we do. That's not true, but that's how we see it. We're inspired and appalled by their behavior in ways that is completely out of proportion with the facts. But I guess that's sort of beside the point. The cool thing, though, about modern mythology is that it plays out more or less in real time. There's no set text with morality and life lessons already in place in a story set in a conveniently distant past. It's here and now, and we are free to see these things however we care to see them, however they translate to our own lives. The media provides a narrative, but more and more these things are personally interpreted mythologies. I suppose that sounds dangerous, but I think that's actually a really good thing. But it's not without its problems. We've all learned, excuse me, I'm sorry. I may need another one of these. We've all learned that celebrity is contagious. Literally, one's proximity to a celebrity or a famous event can turn you into a celebrity. Kato Kaelin, for those of us who are a little older, and Paris Hilton, for everybody else. Those are good examples. Jerry Seinfeld's wife is another one that just mystifies me. Yeah, you know how to cook. Unlike most communicable diseases, though, people seem to want to catch celebrity, to enter the pantheon of modern mythology. They want it, not realizing that as a result, they themselves will become the morality plays of our time, the stories of hubris. If they thought about it, they wouldn't even try to become part of this canon, but they think that they must think that they can somehow be famous and escape the scrutiny and judgment. This is part of that individual interpretation. In spite of all some people see, they themselves believe they are immune to the curse of reality TV, and that only everything attractive about celebrity can be theirs if they're careful. This is something that does interest me. The celebrity of contagion, the contagion of celebrity, and celebrity itself. That's what happens when I don't read directly from this. So how do I examine that? I'm not a good enough writer to look at the subtle ins and outs of...
It's not gunshots.
Okay. Not yet. The subtle ins and outs of celebrity as it exists in the real world. But what if I make it bigger? What if I make it as big as we tend to make celebrities themselves, which is to say, what if I create a fictional celebrity who truly is larger than life, who doesn't seem to succeed in bigger ways than we can, but who actually succeeds on a scale out of proportion with our own abilities, grossly out of proportion with our own abilities, and then fails by our standards in ways most of us couldn't even imagine. This is Eric Forster, another important character in the book. He's a celebrity more than he's a hero. You see him do one heroic thing in the book, and a lot of readers might think that he does two heroic things, but that's not how I see it. I really think he only does one. Maybe I'll talk about that if I have a little time at the end as to why I think that. Anyway, so this heroic event, this heroic behavior initiates his celebrity. He's a celebrity, in this case, who's celebrated for a real reason, not because he's somebody's son or daughter or whatever, friend, what have you. Because of who he is and what he can do, this heroic feat. But I needed him to be even bigger than that. Because of his total arc, I came to see him more as an event than a celebrity. A celebrity event, like Hurricane Katrina, which it's no more notorious than it's celebrated, but it works for Eric. And if Eric is Katrina, then Sam is Ashley Morris. And if you don't know who that is, look him up. Really interesting character. Now you gotta bear with me here for just a second. That's actually written here, and it's a perfect time for me to do this. Sam's friendship with Eric is what defines him in the confines of the book's, thank you, reality at the beginning, and then Eric's transformation. After Eric's transformation, their friendship leads to Sam's own celebrity. It's this celebrity that defines Sam in the context of the narrative because it actually makes him the narrator. And this is the heart of what I wanted to examine, because while Sam is the main character of the book and the point of entry for the reader, he has no story without his Katrina. Because of Eric's new status as I skipped over a very funny part. With cheerleaders like you, who needs a sniper? He has no story without Katrina. Eric's folly becomes his profession. Before this, he has a very humble job. He's a delivery man. Because of Eric's new status as a monster, Sam becomes a writer, a simply humbling job. This means that not only is he nothing to the reader, but he's nothing to himself without Eric's influence. And you know what? That sucks. You know? Seriously, that's terrible, to completely define yourself by someone else or by anything else. It's no way to live. It really isn't. A lot of people think that this story it tells this heroic tragedy, this heroic Greek tragedy of Eric's rise and fall. And I never thought of it that way. This right here, what I'm talking about, it becomes very sad in a very real way. That's the tragedy for me. But I just wrote it. And then I look at Sam and I think to myself, well, can he escape from this? Can he escape from the shadow of Eric? Can he escape from his celebrity? And then become something to himself? This is not so original a dilemma, I know that. But that doesn't mean it's an easy dilemma. Because it isn't an easy dilemma. I had to address this. I had to address this difficulty. And I chose to do that with two other characters in the book, Eric's brother Hugh and Hugh's wife Alma. These two characters are permanently defined by Eric's behavior. What? Right. And there's no escape for them. The redefinition, this transformation, is tragic, just not because of the specifics of the book, but because this is how I really see these sorts of things. That if something, one event or one thing changes you, especially very quickly, it's not going to be a good thing. It only leaves a scar. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people who disagree with me about this. And we can talk about this later. But that's how I see it, you know? I love Citizen Kane, you know? But it didn't change my life. That's helpful. My mother's death, on the other hand, you know, let's get back to Sam, though. He isn't like these two characters. he's more a prisoner of his own fantasies and his own fears than he is of anything else. And by the way, this is exactly how Eric describes him in the book. Eric is not a cipher, in spite of the fact, well, we'll get to it. Eric's not a cipher, just remember that. One of the things that traps Sam is his inability to understand. And this is so key to the book, the mystery and impenetrable nature of life's problems that seems completely real to me, and yet it really bothers a few readers that I don't explain everything to them. Okay, I admit it, I really don't explain much to anybody in this book at all. It actually angered them, especially those coming to this for a superhero story. But knowing everything is boring and so simple and so childish. And that's too small a story, for me, anyway. Okay, so there are a couple of ways I address this abstruseness in Sam's life and in life in general, at least I hope in life in general. The most obvious way is that Sam looks at Eric and he can't understand him. The way most of us look at a hurricane and can't understand it. It's some weather system, sure, but we don't really know where it's going. And I, at least, don't really know why they happen. Not exactly, you know. But will understanding a hurricane really make any difference in my life? Will it make me happier? The other facet of this is that Sam actually defines himself by something he doesn't even understand. He's made his bones as a writer based upon some weird and powerful enigma out there, which got me thinking about things larger than hurricanes, naturally. Because is this really so different from the way many of us live our lives? And how many of us have ever confronted that uncertainty and felt trapped by it? And is our inability to understand the real prison, or is our inability to accept that we can't understand the prison? The relationship between the divine and mortals is described by Mark Twain in The Mysterious Stranger as being not unlike the relationship between an elephant and a spider. The elephant doesn't think too much about the spider, and he might do the spider a good turn on a whim. But if the spider dies, or even if the elephant steps on the spider, it's not really too big a deal. As far as the spider is concerned, the elephant is enormous, remote, and terrifying. So I think this is a really good parallel. Except that there probably is not a lot of spider literature out there analyzing the nature of elephants. But it does sum up my idea about what the mind of a god must be like, specifically the Judeo-Christian God. You've got this being who created all life, and everybody think, sure. All laws of physics, yeah, all right, all matter, all time, all space, all thought, all love, all doubt, all fear, all death. It all works because of this one, let's say, intelligence. This must be an unimaginably complex, sophisticated, mysterious, and profoundly unknowable entity. To say we are children and this entity is a parent is a laughably inadequate analogy, but think for a second about the kind of story a 2-year-old can understand. Something we tell our kids every day. It wouldn't be very complicated, but a 2-year-old might believe that this story tells her everything about what an adult's world really is like, the whole world, hers and the adult's world. Especially if we make that story instructive, like a way to remind toddlers to keep out of the street. It would be all that they would need to know to survive in this world, as long as we're around to take care of them, to watch out for them. But it doesn't, obviously, begin to encompass the complicated practical and emotional world that we experience as adults. Well, some of us. And it really doesn't even tell a child what our motivations are for doing the things that we do, even the things that we do which directly affect that child. Yes, this is how I see religious texts in general. Can they really represent in any meaningful way, the nature of divinity and the mind of the infinite? And why are so many people out there willing to appoint themselves as representatives of the will of God? I mean, they're just spiders. Those texts are useful to Eric, though. He's a good Christian who is colorblind and helps those who need help. But he's just a guy, a 2-year-old in a 2-year-old world, and we can understand him as much as we can understand anybody. I mean, as long as he's just a comics character, I can make him as obscure or plain as I want to. But the minute he changes, I could see those texts becoming less useful, less all-encompassing of a world that is rapidly expanded for him. And so I just knew I wasn't going to be smart enough to understand him anymore. And I didn't want to. I could have just made him another comics character, plain and simple, but that's a cheat. I wanted his mind to be alien. Because, well, we'll get to that in a second. I wanted him to be lost to his family and his friends, his friend Sam specifically. Not just because I thought this was right for his transformation, that nobody can understand a godlike being, but I'm trying to tell a human story. And this sort of thing happens in the real world all the time. Not like this. It's not, played out spectacularly, but your brother gets a job at British Petroleum and he starts voting Republican and you can't figure out what happened to him. That much more quotidian mystery that maybe we all experience to some degree or another is one of those things that real life just turns on, It's heartbreaking, and so few stories break your heart, especially those that try to, in any real way anyway. So I thought again, I'd magnify this issue to make it easier for my clumsy tools to craft, to see if I could approximate that heartbreak. So already I'm setting myself up for failure. This is why Eric's not just an estranged relative. He had to be bigger, but why make him super? Make him godlike? I could have made him an addict. That's a story, Or maybe bigger than that, maybe a murderer. These are people who are difficult for us to understand and are certainly lost. So why? Why a superhuman? The wise-ass answer is, if you want to get DC Comics to publish your story, you have to include a fantastic element. I'm sorry. That's the wise-ass answer, but it's also true. That's the reality of it, and when the hell was I going to accept that? Years in this industry, and I fought it tooth and nail, but finally, and this is where I become a liar, I stopped fighting. I wish I remember who said this. There's Google. I could have looked it up. I think it was Neil Adams. Let's give it to Neil. He wants everything else, so let's give him that. And if you don't know who Neil Adams is, I love you. There are no bad characters, only bad writers. And, I may not be Melville, but I'm not going to leap on that heap of bad writers, if I can help it. So I was really going to try to write a superhuman story that I thought I could write well, or at least that I thought was worth writing. And the only way I could make myself feel that it was worth writing would be to make it human. And the way for me to do that, since I'm barely human myself, was to make it feel as real as I could, and therefore mean something to real people. All right, so how do I do that? First step, brothers. Heroes, super and otherwise, in popular fiction, don't have siblings. Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter. They don't even have parents. Most don't have friends. Why? Is it because maybe sibling rivalry will seem petty in the face of these guys trying to save the world? Probably it has more to do with these characters. Well, they're supposed to be special. Because as it turns out, a lot of them are the chosen ones. You've seen it in The Matrix, and you've seen it in Harry Potter, and I don't even know how many others, but plenty. By the way, this is a hell of a thing to tell a kid, isn't it? There's no free will. You can't rise above the circumstances in life on your own. That you can only succeed and contribute if it was all figured out ahead of time, long before you were born, that you would. Screw that. I don't know what the hell, why would you, I just don't get that. I mean, these books, these movies, these characters are popular. I don't know why. All of which goes to further illustrate my point about how the heroic ideal, not just in comics, obviously, has been distanced from the reader and from reality. To me, this is as much a part of the fantasy as the dragons and evil cyborgs and wizards and vampires, you know. So my first step was going to be to give this guy, this metahuman, a brother and a friend, although I really think of him just as three brothers. But you know, people have friends, right? Most of us have siblings, and at least friends. So I wanted these characters, and Eric specifically, to feel more like us. I wanted family and friendships and relationships to be important to them. Otherwise, when that fantastic element gets introduced, you really have one so-called superhero for your story, one so-called important character to refract the prism of your narrative through. The man or woman to whom this incredible thing has happened, and they become the sole focus. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that besides the fact that that seems to be the only thing almost anybody ever does with these characters for the last 70 years? What's wrong with that besides it being tired? It's because I think the transformed are different, or should be. They shouldn't be the same because they're not. I'm going to begin to sound like an idiot here, but you know, just blame it on the 6 years I spent on the West Coast. Of course, the only way to make the characters relatable in any way is to keep them the same, just super now, you know? That seems disingenuous to me. It's a conceit to make the story happen, to make it easier to write and turn into a monthly book, but it's a cheat. It's a real cheat. Because things that change people, change them. It's not just a backpack becoming more powerful or suddenly much smarter or much faster or filthy rich. It's going to change you. And as we said earlier, by the way, probably not in a good way. And the way I saw Eric as this changed human who I couldn't understand anymore brings us back to Katrina, this force with no human boundaries, too mysterious to deconstruct, and more to the point, too boring. Sorry for any weather geeks that might be here, but we're not still talking about Katrina in terms of wind velocity and low pressure systems. We're talking about it because of what it did to New Orleans and what it did to us. The Super Bowl last year, any sports fans here, took on new meaning, not because there was something special about the football team, but because it became another chapter in the story of New Orleans' recovery from Katrina. The ripples in the pond are always more interesting than the rock that was thrown in it. I don't want to write about the rock. I want to watch those ripples upset the lily pad and fool the hawk into thinking, oh, there's a fish down there, and he swoops down and he doesn't get anything. Or he swoops down and he gets something, but because one of the fish was disturbed by the rock, and it's just coincidence, and that's kind of a fable right there. I'm interested in the ripple that washes up the nose of the doe who's drinking pondside, startles her, she runs off, smack dab into a hunter who shoots her, kills her, and then while he's dressing the body, a deer tick bites him, and he gets Lyme disease, It goes unchecked for years. He suffers terrible health problems, and it breaks up his marriage. Superhero comics are about rocks, and real life is about the ripples. So I wanted to examine the ripples to make it feel more real. By the way, I know others. What's this? I'm sorry, I'm kind of like a puppy, you know. Really, there should be nothing up there at all. This shouldn't even. It's just too distracting, you know. It's really fortunate so far a fire engine hasn't gone by outside, because I'd run right out that door. I need this water. I know others have tried this. You know, what if there were really a Superman in the real world? I'm not the first guy to do something like this. And they use a lot of tricks to demonstrate their, commitment to this idea. One of the easy ones, an easy visual that most of them, maybe all of them, have employed is the action figure. In the story, the super character, the metahuman, has an action figure made in his likeness by some fictional company, and this is supposed to. See, this never should have been. So I'm sorry, where was I? See, the action figure, right? Okay, this is supposed to show us how this superhuman character would be commodified in the real world, because, as we all know, everything is commodified in the real world. You can see them on Watchmen, a supposedly real-world superhero story, and again, I'm sure I'm going to catch some crap for that. But to me, this gag is a sign of a comic book writer writing a comic book. That's his experience of comic book heroes. They're made into action figures. But if there were somebody like Superman in the real world, he wouldn't be seen as a comic book superhero. He'd be seen as a savior. A brave man who does the right thing in the face of all odds. Maybe a little less brave because he can fly, but, but all we can really deal with here is the real world. So let's look at the real world. This character, this person, since it's supposed to be real, would be of interest to everybody. It wouldn't just be of interest to kids who play with action figures. There were no action figures of Martin Luther King Jr., at least not while he was alive. I don't know what they're doing now. Gandhi, Malcolm X, Pat Tillman. Not exactly a savior, but he's my hero. And what about Captain Sully Sullenberger, the pilot of the Miracle on Hudson? Where's his action figure? Where's his Happy Meal? It's a flawed gimmick, and it only serves to ghettoize any attempt at telling a real-world superhero story. Again, sorry for Alan Moore, but I don't. Just to tell you, I don't think he was writing a real-world superhero story. He may have started out that way. I think he was writing a completely different kind of story, a meta story about comics. It's very sophisticated, but it's not what I'm talking about here. So nobody club me over the head as I leave. Not that my book is perfect, okay, but I wasn't going to make this mistake, and it kept me vigilant to avoid others. I hope. The way heroes are dealt with in real life is first to document the heroic event thoroughly. Every aspect. And then chronicle the heroes' lives in detail, and then lionize them. We amplify every facet of their histories in light of and in how it is suddenly relevant to their heroism. A failure on a math test in high school suddenly becomes a huge hurdle on their road to triumph. Before that, it was nothing. We, in essence, mythologize them. We make them into celebrities. See, I'm right. See? It's good stuff. And we can't get enough of our heroes. Don't worry, it's over soon. Although we eventually tear them down, Eric's arc is too brief for us to do that. So the honeymoon of this celebrity, we, or the media, cling to every shred of data we can discover. We try to get as close as we can, and if we can't, then we might look to those closest to the celebrated hero to give us a scrap or even a big, fat, juicy T-bone steak, like the next-door neighbor or the high school math teacher. Well, wait a second. I gave Eric a brother and a friend. And that's how I got my narrator. The one who would be just as confused as the reader about what his friend had become, but who knew Eric well enough in the beginning to give us a ground zero analysis. A guy who had been hit by that first big ripple, a guy who had problems with religious texts himself, and who was also susceptible to the celebrity virus. Not a great man, but not a bad guy. Just average, fallible, hopeful, self-deluded, but trying to get better, and trying to be happy. A guy who seemed to me like somebody I know. There you go. Each piece with a lot of in-between stuff left out. Each piece picked up along the way. And it was a real mess, but it all came together, I think. Two last things I want to say. Number one, this book wouldn't, if it succeeds at all, it's because of Peter Snijberg, the artist, and Bjarne Hansen, the color artist, who I think equally contributed to this and added so much and made me look like a much better writer than I am. And one last point about that second act of heroism. Excuse me, I'm sorry. If you've already read this and you think that there are two acts of heroism, I would ask you to go back and reread it. Reread the whole book, don't just go to that one scene. And this goes for anybody who's about to read it. And look at that second act of heroism and ask yourself why you think that's an act of heroism. And ask yourself if you think that's what Jesus would do. Because that's supposed to be Eric's model. It isn't by that point. So reread. I'm not going to tell you what to think about this book in any way, but I would ask you to reread that if that's the way you're looking at it. And especially focus on the last line of that scene. Not spoken by Eric, but spoken by a police officer. And that's it.
Okay, guys, we're going to do a Q&A. I understand class gets out at 4:15. Is that right? So if anybody needs to go, feel free. Don't feel like you're being rude. You know, you can get out. That's fine.
I'm going to think you're rude.
Sean will think you're rude, but we won't. And you won't ever see him again. So
That's right.
So does anybody have any questions? Go ahead and raise your hands. Yeah, so go ahead.
So you talked quite a bit about like your views on like superheroes. What are your thoughts on like villains or
I didn't catch the last part.
Sorry, it's like what are your thoughts on like villains or like supervillains, like the negative?
They're just as stupid. You know?
What would be like the human?
It wouldn't be.
There wouldn't be.
Right? I mean, if you were Magneto, right? I mean, that's the way to change the world? Suppose that's what he's trying to. I don't know if anybody knows who Magneto is, but you know, that's the way to change the world? No, man. I mean, this guy's got a power that he could make paper on, you know? So do that, become a multi-jillionaire, and that's how you change the world. You know? Killing people, punching people in the nose. In a real world, I mean, look, this stuff is perfectly applicable for kids. Unfortunately, kids don't read them anymore. And so you come up with this, I'm just going to trash this industry. You come up with these weird hybrid stories that try to be sophisticated, but they're about very unsophisticated ideas. And even the good ones aren't very good, you know? That's right, I'm a genius. But this is the best I could do. You know, if I was going to approach this at all, I can either make fun of them, which believe me, I can do, or I could write a story that takes it very, very, very seriously, not moderately seriously, you know? Either very seriously or just rag on it. Because this thing that's neither fish nor fowl, it's not satisfying for an adult to read. And it's not satisfying for a kid to read, which is why sales are in the toilet. I'm a nice guy. I'm not vicious. Trust me. You can ask me anything.
How long have you hated superheroes?
I've never liked them.
Was there was no turning point where you
No, I just always thought they were silly. Like when I was a kid, I read, and this is going to end up in an introduction for my Major Bummer collection, so, by the way, not my choice for the name of that series. It's a long story, but what a terrible name for that series. Please don't let the name of the series stop you from reading it or picking up my collection, available in July. When I was a kid, the comic stories I read were horror stories, like Creepy and Eerie, and the Hulk, because the Hulk to me was just a bigger, stronger, greener, nakeder version of Frankenstein. And I could get that. And it wasn't nice, really. I mean, somehow he didn't manage to kill anybody, which was a huge bummer. When you're a kid, I'm not, not for killing. No, I never liked him. Like my brothers read these. Conan was fun too. Fought monsters. Gotta love that. But I just like this commitment to good. It just never felt real to me as a kid. It's silly. We have good people, but they're not running around always trying to do everything. You got police officers, but I don't mean to diminish what they do, but this is more of an answer than you want, right? Someone must have another question okay. But they're getting paid, They're getting paid for whatever their shift is. As I understand, if there are any police officers here, they don't get paid enough for these shifts. But they get paid for these shifts. And when they go home, they still yell at their wives. They still ignore their kids. They still hit their dogs. They're not perfect. And that making Spider-Man slightly imperfect, man, have cheat on his girlfriend. If you want to write a story for adults. And if you don't, stop having him fight, child molesters. Because, man, it's, it's just not right. I mean, who am I? These guys they're printing money on this, but I don't know. As an adult, it feels terrible, and as a kid, it never made sense to me. Not that the comics were like that when I was a kid, but they just felt silly, sillier than monsters, which that should tell you something. That it? Oh, good. All right.
Did you ever? I don't know if you've ever read it or have an opinion, but Why the Last Man?
Yeah, I didn't like it. I read the first few issues and. No, I didn't. None of the characters felt particularly real to me. It just seemed kind of like The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead comics are good. The Walking Dead TV series just doesn't feel like they're really examining it quite as seriously as they could. Now, Children of Men, which may be where, who wrote Why the Last Man?
Brian K. Vaughan.
Who?
Brian K. Vaughan.
Brian K. Vaughan. Okay, maybe he got this from Children of Men. I don't know. It's a similar idea. Not exactly the same, obviously, but that was an adult movie, because it didn't bother to explain everything to you, because you only have to explain everything to children, and B, it felt very real, like when there were no more babies in the world and people worshiping the youngest among them because this is their last hope for any kind of continued existence. That felt very real, and like by the way, Sam never picks up a gun. I don't even think Sam ever makes a fist. That's my idea of a hero, The character in Children of Men, he never picks up a gun, which I thought was tremendous, And they didn't I'm not picking up a gun. He just doesn't. By the end of the movie, you're like, holy crap, he didn't. And then when that baby comes out, have you seen this movie? Yeah. When that baby comes out, everything stops, and man, that's real. That feels real to me, This is a miracle in this world. And so everybody stops. They go right back to fighting, which is also very real. And what are they fighting for? The kid's gone. But they go right back to fighting. It's like, if that doesn't sum up all wars, I don't know what does. And I don't know. Maybe I didn't give Why the Last Man much of a chance. But I don't know, the first 6 months. I get these comics free, right? So I read them, But the first 6 months, I was like, no, these characters don't feel real to me. They feel like stereotypes and a lot of wise-assery going on. Like, man, the world's over. Time to take this crap seriously. you know, I have one wise-ass character, but a lot of them are wise-ass. Whatever, I don't want to trash the guy. He's a nice guy. Is he here?
Could you talk about your relationship with artists and colorists and editors?
Yeah, man. This is why, you know, some people told me you should write novels, you know, or whatever, or movies. I did do some TV writing, most of which never got produced, thank God, and you'll never find the stuff that did get produced, so don't look. It's terrible. It's the worst. Those kinds of collaborative experiences are just the worst. And I have had bad collaborative experiences in comics, but it's a small world that, you know, people more or less ignore. And I get to work with these, just one or two other guys. You know, I was really lucky. Peter Snyberg, they're both Danish, Peter and Bjarne. Although Bjarne is living in Berlin now. And you just work with these two guys who you know are really friggin' good. And that's a great feeling. And who will work with you, you know, and show you pencils and you say, oh, try this, you know. I always feel like it's not my story, which is why I feel a little funny about this. I mean, I can tell you my part of it, but it's not my story. Once I write it, I release it, and I tell the story to them, and they turn around and tell the story to everybody else. And so it's maybe even more their story than it's my story. But it's our story, which is the best way to look at it. And when it's good, I love it. You know, my prose writing muscles are flabby. You know, I haven't written prose in I don't know how long. Because I'm a natural at this. You know, I'm really good. When I'm really good, I'm really good. And when I'm really bad, I'm mingya. No Sicilians here, right? I can get away with that? Okay. But writing is lonely, and at least I can talk to an artist, you know. And if I'm really fortunate, a colorist, you know. Editors don't count. So I mean, if I was just writing prose, I'd be talking to the dead silverfish on my desk who I haven't cleaned off yet since last week. You know.
Were you interactive with them?
Yeah, as much as I can be. Some of them don't like it, you know, and so you know I don't work with them if I can help it. But yeah, you know, because I'm not saying like, you know, because as I said, it's not really my story. I'm not saying no, do this. What I'm saying is, if you've got a question, ask me. If you've got a better idea, tell me. If you can make me look better, hell yes. Yeah, when it's best is when we have a lot of interaction. But some editors don't like to have writers and artists speak to each other. Some artists don't like to speak to writers. Almost without fail, the story fails as a result. At least in my opinion. I don't know. I've had people come up to me and say, "Man, that issue of RoboCop you wrote was great." Like, oh, all right, man. More power to you. By the way, just so I make this clear about that whole, movie to comics to graphic novel. I'm sorry, to novel. When I was doing that, I wasn't adapting a movie. I was using characters from a movie and creating a new story, which is why it ended up becoming. What did you say? How did you describe a novel? I thought it was great. Non-imagistic. That was great. I gotta trot that out at my editor next time, just to scare the jabbers out of him.
John, for the past few summers, I've been fortunate. I think that's the word I want to use, to be part of the AP Literature Grading Squad, who descends on Louisville for a week, and
Yeah, I don't know what that is, so you're gonna.
we grade the AP, the literature exam.
Oh, I see. Okay, now I thought AP could have stood for anything.
The AP Lit exam, and I've been on question 3 the past few summers. That's the open-ended question, and each year we go back, more and more students are responding to graphic novels in the open-ended question. And this past summer, the question had to deal with exile, and so we had a lot of Persepolis responses. We were told day 2 that graphic novels are not literature. We could not give those students more than a 4 on a 9 scale. There was a mini mutiny amongst the 600 of us on that question. And I would love to know your response.
That's crazy.
That's what we said too.
However, in defense, can everybody hear me? In defense of the people that said that, look at the majority of comics. Yeah, Persepolis, sure. Mouse, sure. Yeah, there's a lot of them out there. You know, City of Glass, Asterios Polyp, sure. But they don't, you know, they hear graphic novel. I know what they think. I know what they think because you know what? It's what I think. The first thing I think of, I gotta peel away Green Lantern and Thor and Wolverine and you know. And so why wouldn't they think that way? I mean, they would have to be. It's a matter of ignorance. It's not a matter of malice. I think. I hope. I'd like to think that if you train them a little, that wouldn't, you know, if that's possible, that wouldn't obtain next year, or this summer, or I forget what did you say last summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't
It's
obtain
every
next
June.
year, but that's my hope. But it's awful, of course. You know, Art Spiegelman is a terrible human being, but Mouse is brilliant. You know. My favorite writer, or one of my very favorite writers, Melville, he wasn't a nice guy either. But, you know, what do I care? I don't have to live with him. You know? I don't have to live with Art Spiegelman either, fortunately for him. But it's brilliant. It's brilliant because it's honest. You know, it's not brilliant because it's about the Holocaust, because there's been a lot of terrible literature, graphic novels and otherwise, written about the Holocaust, pandering, silly, childish, but it's not. You know, it's incredibly honest, and it examines it in an unsentimental way, and it examines himself in an unsentimental way. So, but as I said, I think it is more a matter of ignorance than malice. I hope so. Yeah.
You talked about Melville. Who are some of your other influences, both from the comic world and from writers?
Yeah, not a lot of comics writers influenced me. At first, maybe I borrowed from even Alan Moore when I was very young, pre-Roger. But as it turns out, he was borrowing from cinema, so, you know. And don't get me wrong, so what? You know? I mean, Reservoir Dogs is a cobbling together the storytelling style of you know, early Kubrick and a story that Ringo Lam shot, City on Fire. It's still a brilliant movie, you know. I don't like anything else he's done, but especially how he refuses to tweeze his eyebrows. But no, I you know, my major influence was Charles Willeford, who was Charles Willeford, who wrote Miami Blues, that moderately successful, both in terms of, you know, my terms, the way I look at it, critically and financially. Maybe it did fairly well financially. Moderately successful movie, starring Alec Baldwin. But what I really liked about Charles Willeford was, someone once said that Elmore Leonard is a better writer, but Charles Willeford is a better artist. Because you're reading this book and you get halfway through the book and you're like, wait a minute, I'm reading a book. You know, it's almost invisible. It's hard to explain unless you're reading it, you know? He's got a very minimalistic style. Considering it's just suspense fiction, he tries to say as much as he can by writing as little as he can. And I really like that. I don't think Melville is bad. I mean, I don't know. We're all some of our experiences, obviously, that we can't escape from. But I don't know that I don't think Melville has really influenced me all that much. The one that really always stands out, the one I always think about, the one that crops up in my head every now and again these days when I'm still writing, even though Willeford died many years ago and there's nothing else to read, unfortunately. That's the one that always keeps coming up. And in terms of the visual vocabulary, that's a really good question, and one I haven't given enough serious consideration to. I think it's got to be like some of the better comics artists out there. Like I look at what they do, and I try to find a way to incorporate that vocabulary without being, too much of a mimic. There was one writer who I liked a lot. There are a few writers I like in comics, but I don't feel they've influenced me. But there was one writer I liked a lot that, for a brief period, what the hell was his name? He was writing House of Mystery years and years ago, and I just loved what he did because it was so little dialogue. But there didn't have to be dialogue. At least I felt that way. And he ended up writing. A book for a while. It doesn't matter. It wasn't that important if I can't remember his name, I guess. By the way, one last thing I guess I should have said about this book. No one's asking this question. I don't know if anyone's going to ask me this question, but a lot of people say, why do you write such dark stories? Which is weird. Because I don't think this is a dark story. I think it has a happy ending. I think the ultimate message, not surprisingly after what I've been saying for the past, seems like forever. The ending is it's better to be human. Which is really all we've got, by the way, so it better be, right? Just to get that out of the way, because you guys are smart enough to ask that question. So I'm sorry. I love you all. No, I just wanted to get that out there, because no one's ever asked me, and I've never had the opportunity to respond to it. I do think it's got a happy ending, and it's hopeful. That's it. I've killed everything, haven't I? No more questions?
Well, I have to say, now I don't like my term that I used before, the non-imagistic, because of course text is image bound. It creates images in your mind.
I like it. I'm sorry, I'm using it.
You like it. Well, I have second thoughts about it now, so I was trying to...
No, I mean, like, in terms of its, if you're describing it, then that's a perfect way to describe it. I mean, is it...
It would be better like maybe text-based or text-exclusive.
Yeah, but that's not as funny. No, I mean, there are no images in a novel. Otherwise, it's taken much less seriously.
Yes and no.
No, I mean, there are no images in graphic novels. There are.
Where's you? Help us with our terminology. We're trying to decide how to, I was calling a novel with no pictures in it what did I say?
Non-imagistic.
Non-imagistic. But then I was saying that's not very good because you got all the images that are created by the words in your mind.
But an image is. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, just some novels like Dickens have been illustrated. So, I mean,
Well, that too. So that
but I mean, the images we create in our own mind, and they differ because that's when we see a novel on screen, we say that's not how I imagine X or Y.
Which is why non-imagistic is perfect, because there are no set images. I mean, the way I read a book is, one would hope, going to be very different from the way you read the book, and I'm going to see different things than you're going to see. I hope. That's what every author hopes, because if all you're going to get from an author is his intent, man, he's not going to make a living.
Right. Well, another question was about your process. Did you have another comment?
Well, I was just going to ask for a few witty words on Alan Moore and Scott McCloud.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Or process or process. Take your pick.
I was interested in Stanley Kubrick. I mean, that hadn't occurred to me. So, I mean, the influence there.
Well, Stanley Kubrick on Reservoir Dogs, movie by.
Sorry. Yes.
You're sorry. It sounds like I don't like Alan Moore as a writer. I don't anymore because he's writing these weird stories drawn by this terrible artist, his ex-wife, I guess. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this stuff, but it's really terrible, and it's incredibly expensive. It's like that Woody Allen joke, it's the food here is terrible, and the portions are so small. However, in this case, it's really expensive and it's way too much. And Watchmen is incredibly sophisticated, but to me, Watchmen, and there's nothing wrong with this. I didn't see the movie. I don't see comic book movies unless I don't know they're comic book movies, like Show of Violence. I'm sorry, History of Violence. Show of Violence is a book by everybody's favorite writer, Frederick Wertham. Hey, somebody gets that. Hey, all right. So I don't know how it succeeded or didn't succeed as a movie. I don't see how it could succeed as a movie because it's so specifically a comic book. And most people who know anything about Watchmen know that it's based upon a bunch of characters that DC bought in the 80s from Charlton. The Blue Beetle, The Question, whatever, Captain Atom. And that was his original treatment for these characters. And DC was like, hey, dude, these are trademarks we want to, you can't do this. Why don't you just make a new story? And that's why all the characters are so similar in appearance and, in some cases, attitude. In other cases, it completely transforms the attitude to these other characters from the Charlton group. And so he might have started out thinking, what would it really be like for superheroes in the real world? But look at that world. They're blimps tied up to Zeppelins, I guess, tied up to the Empire State Building. I mean, not only is that anachronistic, but you can't do it, which is why they stopped doing it, Nixon is still president in 1986, And if you wanted to approach the real, Reagan wasn't a big enough target, So it wasn't, and I'm not saying this is a failure on his part. What I'm saying is he constructed his world where all of this, he could control it better. And it is a fantasy world. So what? It's like I said, it's a meta graphic novel. It's a comic book about comics. It's a comic book about the place of comic book superheroes and our expectations. He kicks against those. It's not what would really happen in the world if there were a superhero. I don't think he analyzes that. I don't think he cares about that, It's what would happen if comic book readers were told that their superheroes were silly. And that's the story he wrote, I think. Very, very well. I got nothing against him. He's a lot bigger than I am. Yeah.
I still wanted to hear about your process because it seems to me like you hear a lot of writers talk about where they get their ideas and how they begin, and the process sort of takes over and the characters grow and go places. I hear that a lot. But I almost think I'm hearing from you that you have these almost philosophical quandaries. And yes, and if you want to know what is a superhero, why are we so obsessed with them? What's wrong with them? And from
No, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with us?
Well, yes. And so with that question in mind, you almost look for characters, a way
How can I terrify the poor girl? I can barely breathe. It's not like I can catch you. I'm sorry.
So anyway, so back to, do you like, again, I hear a lot of people saying they start with maybe a character and the character takes over and they go and this person does things and they have a story. It almost seems like for you there's an abstract concept that you want to explore through your characters, or no?
Yeah.
And so you start with this concept and then you go from there and the characters.
I don't know how necessarily abstract it is, but I'll agree with everything else about it. I don't want to sound like a complete douche, but I think anybody who takes writing seriously doesn't start with a character. I don't think so. I think they start with ideas and themes that they think are important to discuss.
I think they'll deny it. They deny that. From my experience, when you ask them about inspiration, they don't like to get it. They may illustrate ideas, they may explore them just like you do, but I don't know, that's been my experience, that they'll say, it took me, and it took me someplace.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no question that this took me places I didn't expect it to take me. There's a real story behind this book. It almost didn't get published. For years it sat. 4 years it sat on DC shelves. They didn't want to publish it in the worst way. The hell does that mean?
I mean, it's questioning their whole enterprise.
In a way, maybe. Yeah, I mean, like, boy, I could have done an hour on how I started this book. I mean, I started to talk about that, but how I started this book, and the second the ink dried on my contract, DC fought me every step of the way. This was supposed to be 12 issues of material. They cut it down. I don't even want to get into it. And I mean, could Alan Moore write Watchmen today? No. No, 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 no. They'd never publish it. You know? Could Blazing Saddles be made today? No. You know? I mean, it examines racism in an incredibly funny and therefore thought-provoking way, but it's, you know, it's grossly politically incorrect, you know? I don't know what made me think of that, but no, I mean, I don't think you know, Alan Moore could get away with Watchmen today. I don't know. I think real writers, and I flatter myself to think I'm a real writer, they start with ideas first. I mean, they might have a character who they like in their heads, but that character is nothing without an idea to you know, as an engine. And I think the character originally comes from an idea. Like, for instance, Ishmael is Melville. No kidding. But, you know, Melville never, he didn't go on a ship that any of that stuff happened. I mean, he probably was part of some whaling events that were like that. But if you know anything about Moby Dick, you know that the Essex, and what's his face, the first mate who survived the Essex. No, the Essex, the ship. Oh, come on, somebody here must know the name of the. I should.
We're all taking Melville next semester.
Okay, well.
We're not there yet.
In I think 1840s, early 1840, the ship the Essex was rammed by a sperm whale and sunk. And it became a really important story because the survivors were in these boats and they ended up surviving by cannibalism. And it's a much more interesting story even than that, as interesting as that is, eating people. And the first mate was one of the survivors who wrote about it. And I wish I could remember his name. This is so embarrassing. No. For me, it's embarrassing because, you know. But I am. I mean, I'm a true Melville nut. And so that's what gave him the idea. Now you'd think, you know, the story that he was going to tell was going to be about the aftermath, the ripples, right? But somehow he manages to write a story about the rock. I mean, the ripples are beforehand, and no, I mean, they're ripples. I mean, you know, Ahab loses his leg, and boy, I could have done Melville here instead. I should have. So those are ripples, you know, but it is a lot about the rock as well, you know, almost literally. And I don't know if he originally intended to do that, or if he looked at the story of the Essex, at the sinking of the Essex, and he thought the aftermath would be interesting. But then, because of the time, you know, we forget that all history is basically forgotten except for like one person's point of view. So all this stuff that was going on, as it, you know, we think like the Civil War, that's all that was going on. Nothing else was going on. Everybody was just sitting at home waiting, you know. There are other things going on. And this was really important in the 40s. This became this really important book that everybody read. And maybe he thought, these people are bored of this, or enough has been said about this. And he decided to write about that son of a gun whale who sank this ship. I mean, that's a great bit, by the way, you know. I mean, it really, at that time, I don't know how people said, boy, they must be pretty smart. Because he knew what he was doing. I mean, I don't know if he knew he was going to sink the ship, but he knew he was going to hurt this big whale that was coming at him. And bam, you know. But you don't see whales ram each other generally, so I think he knew something else was going on there. It certainly, because he did it, and he came back and did it again. Hit it twice or three times before it sank, and then he swam off. Hey, you know? It certainly demonstrates intent. And so, as a result, Moby Dick becomes a character in the book in a way that generally rocks can't, you know? Anyway. So, but people who write comic books, most of them, not Alan Moore, not Brian K. Vaughan, not Grant Morrison, not pick your favorite. Most of them aren't real writers, you know? You talk to these guys and they're idiots, you know? They don't even know anything about baseball, which to me, go kill yourself, you know? But like the and I don't know if you're probably talking about real writers. That's a good question. but comic book writers, yeah, I do run these people who say, oh, like, you know, I want to write Wolverine. Why? You didn't create him. You're not going to get any money in the back end. Why? But more to the point, there's this character that maybe generates a story for them. And they generally think, well, wouldn't it be cool? Literally, I've heard these kinds of conversations. If, like, Wolverine, you know, got his claws stuck in the Hulk and the Hulk died and he had to drag him around. Like, stupid crap like that. You know? And that's where these stories generate from. So that happens, but I don't think that's something anybody cares about for any period of time. You know? We're still talking about Watchmen 24 years. Wait, is that right? 24? 24 years later, 25 years later. But we're not talking about anything else that was going on in 1986. I mean, in comics. You know, well, okay, Dark Knight. But I mean, you know, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comics published in 1986. Why are we not talking about them anymore? Because they're crap. And that's okay. We need crap to keep this industry alive. But you can't think of the people who do those things as being as serious about their craft as someone like Alan Moore or Brian K. Vaughan or Grant Morrison or Warren Ellis or Garth Ennis or Art Spiegelman. Certainly.
I think we have time for one more question, so if anybody has one last question they want to throw out.
No, because I'm just too brutal. They don't.
Do you have any questions?
God, yes. Not for you, but yeah, I got questions out the yin yang.
In your comics.
That's what I do, obviously. Is that it?